Hey, what's going on, everybody? I want to welcome all of y'all to the Archway. I had to start a new series, where I go a little bit more in depth. People been wanting to know about the body, about herbs, about health, so I figure I start chopping things up little by little. So today we're going to be talking about none other than the kidneys. Yes, we're going to talk about the kidneys and see how important the kidneys are to our health. We got a lot of people that deal with kidney disorders, have people in their families that are having problems with their kidneys, or your kidneys may be fine, but you need to know how they work so you could deal with preventative measures so nothing happens. And this will happen based upon you getting a better understanding of how the kidneys work. So we're gonna go over the kidneys. See, I done got some toys as of recently. You know what I'm saying? So I got, these toys in place so I can go a little bit more detail and you understand it. All right. Now, when we talk about the kidneys, what are we talking about? We're talking about the scales of my eye, the Hall of Justice. When you saw on Pooh and you saw the initiate, you see the scale with the heart versus the feather. Well, you didn't even know when you were looking at that antiquatal diagram that diagram is actually reflecting your kidneys. Come with me to the board. Yeah, so you know what? I'm not even about to do that right now. Before I go into that, I gotta remind y'all, this is a video. So what I need you to do first is hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And after you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification button so that you can know whenever I'm putting out some new material. Now, if you got questions or concerns, you can leave them in a comment, or you can email me on the website, and the website link is also in the description, soionicbotanicals.com. The YouTube is KT the Arch Degree, so is the IG and the Patreon, And with that being said, I guess I could bring y'all in on something. Let's go. When you're talking about the kidneys, you're talking about the scales in the Hall of Judgment. You got Anubis or Anpu, you got the initiate there, you got this scale. And the scale is weighing a feather against a heart. As you see right here, you have the ostrich feather, the ma'at feather here. You have the ab, which they refer to as the heart. Now when you look at heart and you look at feather, you need to look at the words, because even in the words, they give you a connection. Heart is in feather. The only difference is feather has the letters FE added to it, all right? And whenever you see FE added to words, that's synonymous with iron. So when you look at heart, heart is earth, the same way earth represents a capacitor, so to speak. It's grounding. Earth stores energy. Earth is charge. Your heart grounds you, So you see that when you rearrange the letters of heart, you'll actually have the word earth up in there. But in this case, when you see the ob, you see a container, because they're talking about the storage of charge. They're talking about storing energy or capacitance. And a feather, if you take an ostrich feather and you go out in the middle of the desert and you put that feather up in the sky, you will start to see static electricity on the tips of that feather. You will see how much energy exists in the atmosphere itself. So the feather represents discharge. So you have charge and discharge, charge and discharge. And people might not understand what the difference between charge and discharge is. Just think about it in a framework of what you know. Let's say you going out to eat. You ordered yourself a meal, right? When you're done eating, what happens? They bring you a bill, right? They charge you. What are they charging you for? They're charging you for the meal. And then what do? You discharge. You discharge, you know what I'm saying? And that's the transaction that ends up taking place in the exchange of goods and services. You could think about it as simple as a cup of water. You know what I mean? An empty cup of water represents potential. What's the potential? The potential is it could be filled with water. You fill it with water. Now the water's full, and now you can drink it. And in drinking, what you getting rid of that water, So you got a charge and you have a discharge action that's taking place. And this same action takes place in our body through metabolism, where you have reduction and oxidation. You have things that are oxidized that are constantly losing energy, losing charge, losing electricity, where you got reduction where you're actually gaining energy, gaining electricity, getting paid. All right. Now, you see it sitting on this scale because it's being balanced against one another. It's interesting too that the other word that you get out of heart and earth is also ether, which represents the medium where the field exists in the first place that we get all of our power from. So the reason why this is so important about the balance of pH and the balance of acidity and alkalinity, you would be able to get an understanding by looking at a particular element by the name of potassium. All right, potassium. And if you look over here on this board, you see that I spelled potassium a little differently. It says potassium because that's essentially what the word means. If you look it up, they'll say potassium is a stylized word of the term potassium. Now, what is potash? Potash is when you take herbs, you take plants, and you burn them to a char, all right, until it's soot, until it's black, until it's charcoal. And when you have that soot, that's nothing but minerals. Dr. Sebi spoke about this endlessly, how you know that there's electricity and that there's power because you can burn these plants down to the point that they're black soot and it will still be electric. It will still be electric because now you have potash. And when you look at the term potassium on the periodic table of elements, you're not going to see the letter P. You're going to see the letter K. Why do you see the letter K for potassium? What does a K have to do with potassium? The K stands for kalium. Kalium. Just like when you say Kali, you say the Iron Age, you say the destroyer, you know, the woman that got like 16 arms and the tongue's out and she got a decapitated head. You know, the killer, the destroyer, that's Kali. That's who potassium is named after. But this is where the term alkali comes from. The term alkaline comes from the term kalium, which is the real word for potassium, which lets you know where the whole concept of acid and alkaline even originated. You see? So you have alkali and potassium. And when you look at the kidney, potassium has to be perhaps the number one electrolyte when it comes to the health of the kidney. There's no coincidence in that. All right? Now, potassium, you should be able to cook herbs as long as you want to cook herbs. People say that you can't cook foods because if you cook foods, it's going to lose its energy. But if that's the case, how can you make tonics that might take 3-4 days to cook? You know what I'm saying? You're not going to lose the power, you know, when you're cooking these foods, because a lot of these foods, a lot of these herbs are temperature dependent. They need water, they need temperature in order for their properties to end up being released. But for those of you who don't understand what acid and alkaline means, acid means that there's an abundance of hydrogen ions in the solution. Alkaline means that there's a number of minerals or anions, or negatively charged particles that are inside the solution, causing the pH level to raise. Now, you don't want to get too alkaline because you can have alkalosis the same way you have acidosis, so there has to be a balance, you know, but the balance is slightly in alkaline's favor as opposed to in acid's favor. You know, acids are necessary: deoxyribonucleic acid, right? Hydrochloric acid, right? Amino acids, these are all acids. You know, so definitely our body utilizes acids as well, but you don't want to get too far on that side where you flip it and now you have mostly acid and not that much alkaline. Okay. Now, when we went into the glomerulus, right here, I talked about the afferent arteriole coming inside the glomerulus, and it had 3 layers of filtration. All right, and I want to get more in detail over the 3 layers of filtration that exist on these capillaries, and I have it here on the board. So we're going to magnify the 3 layers of filtration that exist on the afferent arterioles here on the board right now. Okay, a little bit of artwork. You know, I like to draw. You know what I'm saying? I do a little something. But if you look right here, this is a tube. This represents a capillary that has the 3 layers of filtration, okay? The initial base layer, the endothelial cell layer, contains fenestrae or fenestrations, which are pores. All right, that's why you see these little holes in this tube. You see the holes, all those little holes? These holes represents the fenestrated pores, and that is 1 layer of filtration. So anything that is too big to fit through those small holes are not going to pass through, such as red blood cells and large proteins. They're going to keep going, all right? Now you have this blue band, and it's not just a band, it's another layer. So I'm just cutting the layers away. All 3 of these are covering all of this, but I'm cutting them away. So this blue layer you see right here represents the brush border or the basement membrane, and this is like a Brillo pad. This is a collection of proteins and such that are made in a way that creates another barrier, another brush border, and it has a negative charge to it as well. So that is going to prevent certain charged particles from being able to get through. So whatever might have been small enough to get through those holes, now when it gets to the basement membrane, it ain't going to be able to get through that. Only the things that are meant to pass through. The final layer is amazing. These are actually cells that are wrapped around the tube that are like octopi. They look like the little ghosts from Pac-Man that you be chasing around when you eat the pellets. And they have arms, okay? They have arms that extend out, and the different cells lock their arms into one each other, similar to how I'm doing my hands right now. And if you look right here, you can see these little arms, these little finger-like arms that are fitting into each other's space, but there's a negative space around it, and that negative space is called filtration slits. Filtration slits. These filtration slits are the final layer of filtration. So you got the holes in the fenestrae, you have the brush border in the blue, and then you have the podocytes, which have these little feet or fingers sticking out called pedicels, and in between the pedicels are little microscopic slits, and they're called filtration slits, and that's where the glomerular filtration goes through. This is where the 125 milliliters a minute ends up getting filtered through, is through that. This is just the nucleus of that podocyte as it's wrapped around this tube, and then you see how it's interlocked in those filtration slits. So fenestrae, brush border, and filtration slit. Those are the 3 layers, all right? Now, over here what we have is a blow up of the loop of Henle. Okay, so remember I talked about the proximal and distal convoluted tube, but then we also have the descending loop of Henle and the ascending loop of Henle. And what I did is I took this region, and I blew it up on the board. All right, and what you have here is at the top, more in the cortex, right? This is this pink line, this dashed line is separating the cortex from the medulla. This region closer to the cortex is more permeable to water. It's not too many solutes or salt in that region. It's mainly water. And as it descends down into the loop of Henle, the amount of salt increases. The amount of solutes in the interstitium, which is around this, increases. So you have this fluid dynamic and kind of this solid dynamic. And then you also have a separation of charge. And this exchange, they call the counter current multiplier, because you have this particular flow that's occurring, then you have the flow that's going in and out between the lumen of this tube, which is the inside of the hose, versus the actual interstitium, which is around it. And then you have the vasa recta, right, which are the network of capillaries, right? And they are also going in a particular direction opposite than this. So the counter current multiplier. Multiplying what? Multiplying fluid, multiplying hydrogen, hydrogen and 2 oxygens, water for that matter. This is another mechanism that exists inside the kidneys that is responsible for the charge that you have in your body and maintaining the alkaline balance, you know, through the release of what? Hydrogen ions and potassium in your urine, you know? So we have the scales of my aunt that are being balanced by the asymmetrical positioning of the kidneys that sit inside of your body, balancing what? The storage capacity properties that they have, you know, which they refer to as the heart, and the discharging properties of the feather, okay, which represents the difference between oxidation and reduction, okay, or redox. And through this, we get this through the filtration of the bloodstream and the plasma by way of these 3 layers of filtration, and then the consequent filtrate, which goes through the tubular network and hits, you know, a certain powerful point when it comes through the loop of Henle before it is dumped in the collecting duct. The urea and all of the waste products are then released through the renal pelvis, the ureters, into the bladder for excretion outside of the body. All right, so that's enough of that. Let's get back to business. All right, now, when you look at the kidneys, now right here, you know, in our body, the kidneys are actually asymmetrical. And when you say asymmetrical, symmetrical means that it's going to be the same on both sides, right? Asymmetrical means that it's different. So you're going to have one kidney higher than the other actually in the body, which is actually going to look like scales. But when you look here, you're looking at this blue tube and this red tube, all right? Anytime you see a blue tube in the body, you're looking at veins, the venous system. And the veins in the venous system is the blood that is headed towards the heart to be oxygenated again. It's deoxygenated blood flowing through the veins. Now, the fresh oxygenated blood that has just left the heart is the red, which is the arteries, and it's red because it's supposed to reflect that it's saturated with oxygen. So these 2 main veins and main arteries go under the name of the aorta, which is the actual artery, and the venous name is the inferior vena cava. So you got the vena cava and you have the aorta, and those are the 2 main vessels, the 2 main arteries and veins that go through the trunk or the torso of your body, dispersing all the bloods and the nutrients to the necessary organs. In this case, we're talking about the kidneys in the renal and the urinary system. So if you notice, just like a tree has a trunk and it bifurcates, or it splits into branches, all right? And we talked about this with the bronchial tubes in the lungs. The same thing happens with the arteries and the veins. So you have a main artery, right? And then the artery then breaks off, and now you have what you would have the renal artery and the renal vein, okay? The renal artery and the renal vein. So the oxygenated blood and nutrients that needs to go to the kidney to nourish the kidney is coming by way of the artery, but the deoxygenated blood and the blood that doesn't have as many nutrients in it that has deposited into the kidneys would be through the vein. So you have the renal artery and you have the renal vein, all right? Renal artery and renal vein. And then as you flow through the renal artery starts to turn into a smaller vessel, similar to you being on an interstate. Interstate got about 7 lanes, right? But then you take an exit, right? And when you get on that exit only has about 3 lanes. And then you get off another exit that's like a main road, and it's just a 1-lane street, you know? So your vessels follow that same type of mapping, you know, where they break down. It's what you would call fractal. So when you go from the arteries into a smaller set of arteries, those are called arterioles. And when you go from the veins to a smaller vein, you call that venules. So we have the renal, we have the aorta, the main artery, which is then leaning into the renal artery, and then the renal artery then steps down into the renal arterioles, or rather the afferent arterioles. The reason why it's called afferent is because that's the blood that's headed to the kidney, while you have the efferent arteriole, which is now leaving out of the kidney. So once again, we got aorta, renal artery, renal arteriole, and then we enter the actual kidney. Now, before I get deep into that, as you continue to look at this diagram right here, you notice these long tubes coming down from the kidneys and then terminating in this kind of almond-shaped, teardrop-shaped gland right here. And what you're looking at is the actual bladder. It's a bladder, and these are the ureters. So the whole part of the kidney is to, similar to what Moses did when he split the ocean. You see what I'm saying? You're separating the waters from the waters. You're separating the blood from the plasma. And then from the plasma, separating the elements of the plasma that your body still needs from the elements that need to be released from the body through excretion, urination, releasing your waste. So that waste dumps into these ureters. These ureters then go into the bladder, okay, right here, all right? And underneath the bladder for men is a small walnut-shaped gland, and that's the prostate. But that's another talk. But this is sitting on the pelvis, and then from the bladder, once the bladder is distended to a certain degree, meaning it's filled up to a certain point based on volume and weight, your nerves send a message to you that lets you know that you need to use the bathroom, and you go to the bathroom and you release. And in doing that and using the bathroom, you're getting rid of waste, and you're also balancing the pressures in your body, because we're gaseous beings and we gotta stabilize our pressure. When we take our blood pressure 120/80, it's in millimeters mercury, and that's based on pressure. All right. So let's get into this bad boy right here. Ooh-wee. So when I went into this particular diagram, what I didn't talk about was the adrenal glands, which sit on the top of the kidney. The adrenal glands do exactly what they sound like. They are glands that produce adrenaline, okay? And, this is why you can see how kidney issues can lead to adrenal fatigue, or adrenal fatigue can lead to kidney issues, because when you deal with adrenaline and corticosteroids, you're dealing with the kidney organ and its effects. All right, so this is the cream of the crop. You know what I'm saying? I love the human body. You know what I'm saying? There's a grand geometry that exists inside of us that's unlike anything else, and it's just self-perpetual. It's beautiful. So here is a cross section, so to speak, of a kidney, so we can get a better idea of what's going on inside. Sitting on the top is the adrenal gland, which is broken up into two parts, which is the outer region, the cortex, and the inner region, which is the medulla. The outside of the kidney is the fibrous capsule, and this is where you get into the role of the fascia, which is the web-like, spider-like material that pretty much is your essence. It's the medium between your spirit, your essence, the intelligence, and the physical matter that makes up your body. And how you know this is that the fascia create the shape that your organ's gonna be. And once that fascia makes that shape, then the cells fill that space in. So the only reasons why the cells know what to do and know how to create this grand architecture is because of the blueprints and the plans and the foundation that is left by the fascia. So this kidney has a fibrous capsule, and that's what this thin skin is that you see going around the outside of it. And then right underneath that, you have a region called the cortex. And then when you go a little deeper, you have something called the medulla. All right. Now, we have the renal artery, we have the renal vein. The renal artery steps down into smaller vessels, as you can see, and these are the renal arterioles, okay? And then the renal arterioles then terminate into the capillaries, and the capillaries form a bed, and this bed is called the glomerulus, and the glomerulus is housed by a cap, all right, called the Bowman's capsule, you know, and it's no coincidence that Dr. Sebi's last name is Bowman, and one of the most prominent parts of your kidney share his last name. So when you look at this anatomy of this kidney, you know, in this cortex region, we're going to see renal corpuscles. The corpuscles are the region where the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule are, right? But then when you go down in the medulla, you're going to find the renal pyramids and the renal columns, and you're going to find the renal papillae, which terminates into the renal calyx, okay? And then the renal calyx empties into the renal pelvis, and then the renal pelvis empties into the ureter, and then the ureter extends down to the bladder, and then from the bladder you use the restroom. So you can see it's an easy flow. It's nothing difficult about it. And when I talk about the renal corpuscles, I'm talking about a structure called a nephron. And our kidneys really are an amalgamation of nephrons, similar to an orange is an amalgamation of pulp. You ever notice when you peel an orange, it has all these sections, and then each one of those sections are made up of these little individual bladders of juice, you know what I'm saying, that when you puncture them, the juice comes out. Well, kidneys are made up of nephrons. Each one has about 2 million. So you're talking about, you know, anywhere between 3 3/4 to 4.5 million nephrons between the two of these kidneys. This is why when you deal with kidney issues, they say kidney failure, because you have a certain percentage of nephrons that are breaking down and dying, and that's throwing the pressure off. This is also why people are able to survive with one kidney, because even with one kidney, you're still dealing with millions of nephrons or millions of pipes. All right, so we have the same way we have the glomerulus, which we'll be getting into shortly on this diagram. We have another bed of capillaries called the vasa recta. All right, so you have the glomerulus, which is created from the afferent arterioles, right? And then you have the vasa recta, which is formed from the efferent arterioles that leaves the renal corpuscle. And as we get deeper into this conversation, we're going to find out how exactly do the kidneys balance alkaline and acid. You know, how does that happen? Why is that even important? You know what I'm saying? And what is the functionality of all these different parts, you know? You have a fat deposit in a sinus right here in the kidney. That's what this is right here. Trying to see what other parts we might be missing. So once again, we have the adrenal gland, cortex and medulla, the whole kidney, fibrous capsule as the skin, you know, cortex as the tissue right under the skin, medulla as the deep tissue far from the skin. Then we have the papillae, the calyx, the renal pelvis, you know, and then the ureter. Now, I want to get a little bit more deeper into the actual renal corpuscle, and in order to do that, I gotta go into this diagram right here. All right, this bad boy. This is the one. All right, so we enter into the kidney from the aorta. The aorta turns into the renal artery. The renal artery turns into the renal arteriole. The renal arteriole then turns to capillaries. These capillaries are in a bundle, kind of like a ball of yarn. And that ball of yarn is called the glomerulus. Okay, the glomerulus. That's what this is right here. So, arterioles into glomerulus. This also is a nice section taken out of the kidney so you can get an idea of these structures as well. So when you look at this large structure right here, I can stand it up. All right, stand that up right there. And if you take a chunk out of the medulla and the cortex, this is the fibrous capsule, this is the cortex, this is the medulla. These circles represent the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus, okay? And these represent the arterioles that are networked through the kidney in order to provide the nutrients in the blood that's about to get filtered. And this is a blow up of these circles right here. So this part, this yellow part wrapped around the capillaries that looks like a capsule, that's the Bowman's capsule. What is the Bowman's capsule? I want y'all to think of the Bowman's capsule similar to a sink or a toilet. The reason why I'm saying that is because both the sink and the toilet represent a receptacle, a bowl shape, right? That has a hole and a pipe coming from it that leads somewhere. And that's exactly what the Bowman's capsule is. It's like a toilet bowl or a sink that's wrapped around all of these capillaries that has a pipe or a tube that comes from it. And this is the place, this is the boundary, this is the threshold between your cardiovascular system, where your blood resides, and your actual urinary system, where you're gonna form urine to be excreted out of the body. So the afferent arteriole, all right, is bringing blood from the heart, from the arteries to the kidneys. And what ends up happening is they're gonna end up coming inside of this space where the glomerulus is. And the glomerulus has a very important job in that its structure contains 3 layers of filtration to help to filter the blood. One of the main things that gets filtered is red blood cells themselves. They're too large. If they didn't, then you would be urinating blood in the toilet, and you don't. When you do see blood in your urine, you usually panic, don't you? Because the filtration system that exists in the glomerulus doesn't allow blood to go through. It also doesn't allow other large proteins to go through too. Only water, glucose, amino acids, you know, certain elements, so forth and so on, are able to go through. And larger items are not allowed to go through, and it's filtered. Now, what ends up being filtered through the glomerulus into this space, this bladder, this capsule called the Bowman's capsule, is called the filtrate, all right? And the filtrate is very important because when you're dealing with kidney health and you're getting a lab results or any diagnosis from the doctor, one of the numbers or measurements they're going to go over with you is the GFR, which is the glomerular filtration rate. Just look at that word. When you hear glomerular, you're like, oh man, like the glomerulus, like this thing right here. Filtration rate. Oh, that must be the rate at which this thing is able to filter my blood. And there's a number for it, and that number is 125 milliliters a minute. That's how fast and how efficient your kidneys are constantly filtering your blood. And they come up with this number because all of the blood or the fluid that comes into the kidney comes through at about 625. And when you filter your blood, you're only filtering 20% or 1/5 of that amount. And 1/5 of 625 is 125. And that remaining 500 is the flow that comes out the efferent arteriole on the other side, which we'll get to shortly. So 125 a minute. That's how fast and how much fluid you are filtering through this particular structure right here. But guess what? When you have a renal issue, when you have a kidney issue, they call it GFR 60. What are they saying? They saying that your filtration rate has dropped all the way to 60. That's half. So obviously there's a pressure issue. But based on this structure, we have a lot of things that are able to assist, so to speak, in regulating what you would call what? Blood pressure. All right, so let's talk about blood pressure real quick, because that's something that is talked about all the time. You know what I'm saying? And we rarely get an idea get a real good understanding of what blood pressure is. So I want you to think of a hose. It's real simple, because when you think of blood pressure, you're talking about a cardiovascular system, enclosed system, a tube with blood and fluid and water and stuff going through it. So just think of a hose, because a hose is a tube, right? And you're able to control the flow of that tube. If you turn it on just a little bit, it's not that much pressure. Water's coming out the tube, but it's just kind of dripping out. You turn it all the way up, you increase the pressure. Now you got all of this water shooting out of the hose. What happens if you pinch the hose? No water comes out, but pressure builds up. And then when you release the pinch, the hose is flailing all over the place, shooting water. So think about that. That's what's happening inside of your body. There are things that happen to your blood that increase the pressure, the force of the fluid that is pressing against the walls of the hose or the walls of your vessels. And what determines this? The circumference of the vessels determine this, meaning that if you're eating a certain way and you're building up atherosclerosis, occlusions, narrowing of the vessels where now the blood doesn't have enough of a space to go through, or vasoconstriction, meaning you're taking things or you're experiencing things that's causing your vessels to constrict. That's going to increase the pressure. When your blood vessels relax, when they dilate, when they open up, that's when your blood pressure drops. So we have a system inside of our body that's responsible for that. And this is called the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Okay, once again, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. This is the system that deals with governing your blood pressure. And when you are dehydrated, this is dehydration, which we really have to understand that term, because our body is made of water, and we think just because we knock a bottle of water back that we are hydrated. But no, it's similar to having a desert. Let's say you have a desert and you want to start a garden and it rains. Why doesn't anything grow when it rains in that desert soil? Because the water gets washed away. There's nothing there to keep the water there. So the 125 degrees evaporates that water quicker than the water is saturated. You got to think about that in your body when it comes down to inflammation and the fact that you're just drinking water on the go and you're not allowing water to actually saturate in your body and saturate inside your cells so you can properly be hydrated. But through dehydration, what ends up happening is this particular glomerulus has an apparatus, all right, that connects the system that comes after the glomerulus with the start of it, and it's called the juxtaglomerular apparatus. I know that's like, what is that? But if you think of the word juxtapose or juxtaposition, right? You know that means it's on the side, right? Right? It's close, it's on the side. Right, and glomerular, we know what a glomerulus is, and then you know what an apparatus is, right? So it's saying an apparatus that is close or juxtaposed to the glomerulus. And these cells are specialized in that when the blood pressure drops due to dehydration and other factors, a particular molecule is released by the name of renin, okay, renin. And what renin does is renin is kind of like an editor. It's an editor because your liver produces a molecule also at the same time called angiotensinogen. Angiotensinogen is an inactive molecule, but what renin does is renin is an editor that edits angiotensinogen into angiotensin. And why am I saying edit? Because it's like, wait, I thought we was talking about like biology, KT. Like, what are you talking about? Well, when you're dealing with a protein is a series or a sequence of amino acids. The same way that letters make up words and words make up paragraphs, that's how you get from amino acids to peptides to proteins to even more elaborate things. So it's the same situation going on there. In this case, the renin is clipping or cleaving a certain number of amino acids off of angiotensinogen and turn it into its active component, which is angiotensin. So it's similar to editing, you know, where you have a particular word and you cut it down and now that it's a smaller word. So this new smaller word is now an active form, angiotensin. Once angiotensin is active, it forces the lungs to produce or release an enzyme called ACE, which you've heard of when you hear ACE inhibitors, which you've also heard of with COVID in regards to ACE receptors being the site at which the coronavirus docks through its spike protein. ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme, and it is going to turn angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 then goes on to activate the adrenal glands, specifically in the cortex. The cortex is broken up into three parts. You have the zona glomerulosa, you have the zona fascicularis, you have the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa is the layer of the cortex responsible for producing the hormone called aldosterone. And what aldosterone does is it increases the blood pressure. So aldosterone is a hormone produced by your adrenal glands, only released by the creation of angiotensin 2 by way of angiotensin converting enzyme of the lungs, which in consequence is produced by angiotensin 1, which is made active by renin, which is produced by the juxtaglomerular cells, which is only released because you dehydrated. So you see all these steps that take place for something as simple as not getting water inside your body, because water is a battery. It's not just there to make things fluid and to move, but because it holds charge and it is the medium for all the chemical reactions that take place. Okay. So when I talk about the zona fascicularis and I talk about the zona reticularis layers inside of the cortex, the fascicularis actually is responsible for cortisol production, and the reticularis is responsible for DHEA and your androgen sex hormones. The center medulla is where you produce epinephrine and epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. And this is where the connection between stress and health comes into play. Because when you're dealing with your adrenal glands and producing adrenaline, you're dealing with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is part of the autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system responsible for doing things automatically. Okay, you also have a somatic nervous system where you have to be responsible for moving things. You know, I'm moving my arms right now, I'm turning my head, I'm deciding to speak, I'm using my voice. Those are all voluntary movements and nerve impulses made by my somatic nervous system. But the autonomic nervous system is broken into two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. By saying that, you already know that those are two different things. Those are opposite ends of the spectrum. You can't run and eat, okay? You can't fight and sleep. You see what I'm saying? So if you're dealing with the sympathetic nervous system or fight or flight, that means that you are encountering fear, you are encountering danger, you are encountering stress. And because of that stress, the body makes a decision. It's like, you know what? This person think they about to die. You know what? They might not need to eat a burger right now. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to send all our blood, right, to the arms, to the fingers, to the toes, to the legs, because I don't know if this person is a coward or he's courageous. Because if he's courageous, he's gonna need them arms and them fists to knock that dude out. And if he's a coward, he's gonna need that blood in them legs so he can hightail up out of here. You see, so that's where the blood goes. So there's going to be vasodilation that occurs in the arms and in the blood to get the blood all out there. It's going to be constricted in certain parts for pressure, so certain things can happen. So you don't have no blood in your organs at this time, at least not enough to truly pull nutrients out and feed it and everything that it needs to do. It's not going to happen, right? Now let's flip it over to parasympathetic, rest and digest, right? So when we eat, we're supposed to sit down. We're not even supposed to be eating standing up, because you want to saturate yourself with what you just consumed. You want the waters and your enzymes to break these things down for things to get properly absorbed so you can extract the energy of the sun, the nutrients, the minerals to replenish your body. Okay, this is what you do when you rest and digest. You can't do this if you're scared. Okay, you ever told your mama, you know what I'm saying, you know, don't eat, no ice cream and cake like that before you go to sleep, or, don't watch no horror movie before you eat dinner, because how you think and your energy feel, matters a great deal, before you start consuming food and eating food, because you're going to imbue that food and imbue this process of digestion with all that negative energy, and it's going to affect the process. So you separate them. So a lot of people are dealing with adrenal fatigue because in regards to how they're dealing with their current environment, with the blue light coming from the screens, and you have the Wi-Fi frequencies, you have the news, you have the pandemic, you have all of this stress that's going on. So people are in a constant state of fear. People are in a constant state of stress. They are not resting. They are not getting their circadian rhythm on point. So the adrenal gland is fatigued. It's fatigued because it's constantly pumping adrenaline. Every time you stress, adrenaline is pumped. Adrenaline. You keep pumping it. The kidney, the adrenal gland is getting overworked. And it's almost going to get to the point, it's going to be like a boy who cried wolf, where when you finally are in a real situation, you done got so desensitized. You know what I'm saying? That now the kidney, the adrenal gland doesn't even know what to do. So this is how you're able to connect the way you're eating with the way you're living, and see how your thinking can affect your digestion, your food intake, and your food intake can affect your thinking as well, So we want to, marinate on that. Now, as we continue through this kidney, we stop pretty much on the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, but once you leave the Bowman's capsule, let me bring this back over. Once you leave the Bowman's capsule, now you're going to end up going through the tubular system, all right? And this tubular system is dynamic, okay? We call it the proximal convoluted tube, okay? Then we have the descending loop of Henle. Then we have the loop of Henle. Then we have the thin ascending loop of Henle, the thick ascending loop of Henle, and then the distal convoluted tube. All right. Now, when you hear the term proximal convoluted tube, you know that that's the part of the tube that is closest to the Bowman's capsule. Why is that? Because it's called proximal. Just listen to the word. When something is in proximity, that means it's close. Okay, so we're talking about a convoluted tube. Convoluted just means it's twists and turns, right? So I got this old, like for people who don't got earbuds, they still got the old headphones. Right? You don't wrap them things up right, you pull them out your pocket, it's convoluted. That's a convoluted wire. So proximal convoluted tube means the part of the tube that's close to the glomerulus. Distal convoluted tube means that it's far away, because it's distal, it's far, Distal meaning distant, all right? So you got proximal convoluted tube, then you got distal convoluted tube, and then you got the loop of Henle. Now, the proximal convoluted tube, what's going to happen is, as this filtrate is being formed, as you're splitting the plasma from the blood, you're not going to get rid of all of that. A lot of that stuff is going to get reabsorbed, okay? So some 70% of all of the glucose, all of the amino acids, and certain elements get reabsorbed back in the proximal convoluted tube. And enters back into the bloodstream. And I know you're like, how does that happen? Well, there's another bed of capillaries similar to the glomerulus. The glomerulus is the afferent arteriole leading into that. But when you come out of the Bowman's capsule, you have the efferent arteriole, and that creates another bed of capillaries called the vasa recta. And the vasa recta inundates and wraps around the tubular system so that an exchange can take place. So you have reabsorption and you have excretion. You know, you have a situation where you're reabsorbing elements back into the bloodstream to be back in the body. And then you have things that are continually moving along the tubular system till it gets dumped in the bladder, and that's to be excreted out of the body. That's the difference. Now, when you deal with the proximal convoluted tube, these tubes are interesting because they're similar to the intestines in that they have folded, they have the folded surface which creates these hair-like, finger-like projections called villi. So the same way you have microvilli that are covering your entire small intestines, that's how you absorb your food, right? Through these microvilli. You also have a form of these villi in your kidneys in the proximal convoluted tube as well, to increase surface area to absorb things specifically. Now, one thing that happens in the proximal convoluted tube that a lot of people might not be aware of is the activation and the final stage of vitamin D. So when we make vitamin D in our skin, being out in the sun through ultraviolet B energy, this is some 310 nanometers, somewhere around there. You know, you're going to deal with that between April and September in the temperate regions, and if you're in the equators, all year round. Once the sun goes above its 30-degree inclination, that's when UVB energy is available. When it drops below 30-degree inclination, that's when UVB is gone. But during that time, you have ultraviolet B. Ultraviolet B then penetrates your skin to the subcutaneous fat, where cholesterol is stalled, and it is converted into vitamin D1, sent to the liver, vitamin D2, sent to the kidney, proximal convoluted tube cells with the villi, the mitochondria then turns it into vitamin D3. Now you have the active form of vitamin D that does all the magic that vitamin D does, okay? So that's the proximal convoluted tube. Once you go through the proximal convoluted tube, now you're going to descend down through the descending loop of Henle. And as you drop down, a lot of water is getting extracted out of the tubular system into what you call the interstitium. What is the interstitium? The interstitium is the space between spaces. So we got vessels in our body, right? We got fat in our body, we got tissues. Well, there's fluid in between the tissue, there's fluid in between the cells, there's fluid in all the negative spaces of our body, and that is the extracellular fluid and the interstitium. And the interstitium is saturated with solutes. Solutes is a fancy way of saying elements. You know, when you say chloride and sodium and potassium and all of that, those are all solutes, all electrolytes, what, you know, you drink coconut water for. So as you go down the descending loop of Henle, you actually lose water. Water is going into the interstitium, and solute or salt starts to come in. And as you get down to the bottom of the loop of Henle, you know, you get to where you have more salt, less water. And as you go up the ascending loop, going back up again, water starts getting introduced again. The salt level gets lower and lower, and you have high water at the top, you got low water at the bottom. So you have this kind of difference between charge, because when you have all of these elements that have a charge to it, you have a negative charge in one space, you have a positive charge in another, then you have another difference. You have a high amount of solid objects like sediment, and then you have a high amount of fluid. So you have a difference in pressure, and then you have a difference in electricity. And what this does is help to balance the alkaline and acid levels in your blood and in your system. Why is that important? Because your blood is 7.635. That is slightly alkaline. If you go neutral or go acidic in your bloodstream, you will die. So it is extremely important that the body keeps your blood alkaline, and it does this through calcium, through the parathyroid gland, through calcitonin and parathyroid hormone affecting the osteoclast and osteoblast cells in the blood. And it also does this by way of the kidneys and the management of particular ions. Now, what is the exchange that takes place? Well, normally what ends up happening is we are releasing potassium and hydrogen ions, and we are reserving or preserving and reabsorbing water and salt, so and chloride as well. So you got chloride, you got sodium, you got water coming in, you got potassium and ions going out. You know what I'm saying? Why is hydrogen ions being flushed out the body? Because concentration of hydrogen ions is what results in acidity. Acidity is pH. pH is parts hydrogen. The more hydrogen in the substance, the more acidic it is. The less hydrogen ions in the substance, you know, when hydrogen is bonded to something else, the more alkaline it is. So now you can see how, you know, acidity and alkalinity can lead to an understanding of voltage and electricity and conductance of energy, you see. And that's what we're dealing with when we are talking about alkalinity inside of the body. All right, so we going through the loop of Henle. We went down the descending loop. We went down the loop of Henle. We doing the upper loop, and this whole process is called the countercurrent multiplier. The countercurrent multiplier, because the vasorector beta capillaries, along with the tubular system, they have a flow that's going in an opposite direction, a countercurrent. And in that opposite flow, you also have the opposite of going from a water fluid dynamic, high water, low solute dynamic, to a high solute, low water dynamic. And that's also opposite. And because they're running in the opposite direction and doing opposite things, that difference, as with anything else, creates a friction that produces a fire. It produces an energy. It produces a power. Just like in our mitochondria, our membranes have a gradient of positive charge and negative charge, and it drives our ATP synthase to produce ATP. This same process is going on in our kidneys in regards to producing electricity and charge. And you see this once again, like I started this off with the scales of my eye having the feather and the heart next to it, being weighed against one another, because the heart represents capacitance, so the storage of charge, while the feather represents discharge of electricity. And how you balance those two principles or weigh those two principles against one another determines the state of one's soul. You know, how much do you have in store versus how much did you release? You know what I'm saying? Your energy dynamics is going to tell me everything I need to know about your life. You know what I mean? I don't have to like go through your brain and read all your memories. I can tell by your energy, you know? So once you come up the ascending loop of Henle, the descending loop is permeable to water. The ascending lip is impermeable to water, and it only becomes permeable to water when you deal with the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, and anti-diuretic hormone aldosterone are released, and they create aquaporins that flood to the membranes, and now you can allow water in and out. But normally the ascending limb is not permeable to water, but the descending limb is. So once you get past that, now you're in the distal convoluted tube. Remember, so now we're away from the glomerulus. We're at the furthest part away, and we go from there to the collecting duct. All right, the collecting duct. And the collecting duct is this long shaft right here. Okay, and all of these branches just represents different distal convoluted tubes that are terminating at the collecting duct. And the point of the collecting duct is now to, at this point, what you want to do is you want to concentrate the urea. You see what I'm saying? Because urea is a form of nitrogen and ammonia. It's a byproduct of, protein breakdown, degradation, and other components that are rich in nitrogen. How they break down and get released from the body, they're released in the form of urea. When you don't reach the stage of urea properly and it gets released from the body, what you have now is uric acid, and uric acid crystals form. And when uric acid crystals form, now you have a situation where you can create kidney stones, okay? And kidney stones are formed in this region because, like I just told you, the loop of Henle has all these solutes and all these minerals. So you got all these components that essentially, if their charges are opposite, then they can come together. The same way a north and south part of a magnet stick, a negative charge and a positive charge are going to attract. So now you have all of the, uric acid, struvite, sodium oxalate, calcium oxalate. You got all of these components that start to come together, and then you get a mass, and that mass can keep growing, and eventually it ends up in the renal pelvis. And if you have, let's say you can imagine a golf ball in a hose. But imagine that golf ball has spikes and shards of glass sticking out from it. And you turn on the water to try and push the golf ball through the hose, but those sharp edges are ripping and gripping the walls of the hose as it pushes through. That's what stones are doing to your ureters. And your nerves are feeling that pinch, and your blood vessels are getting ruptured. So yeah, you're bleeding when you urinate, you have inflammation, you have swelling. Sometimes it can block the ureter altogether, and now all that would be urine is staying in the kidney. So you're gonna definitely have an infection if something like that happens. So you have to figure out a way how to dissolve that, and how you dissolve that is what I have laying across this desk right here. And these leaves that you see is a leaf called love bush, all right, also known as Bryophyllum pinnatum. This is the electric leaf. 2.2 kilograms of this leaf juiced will power 20 kilowatt hours in a home. All you need is copper sulfate and electrodes, which are going to be made from zinc and from copper. And when you're able to do that, you can liberate electricity from this leaf to the point that it can power your everyday devices as well as the house that you live in. And its byproduct, its waste, is molecular hydrogen and methane. Now, kidney-wise, this particular plant, its extracts have all of these nutrients inside that have the ability to perform anti-urolithiatic effects. When you're talking about urolithiasis, you're talking about urinary when you say uro, and when you say lith, that's like monolith or like lithonia or like lithograph. All of that denotes what? Stone or rock. So urolithic, dealing with your urinary system, is amassing or creating or producing stones in that system, kidney stones. And this particular herb right here is one of the most powerful substances on the planet that is used to dissolve stone, because a kidney stone, some people feel it is the most powerful, it's the most painful experience to man. And you got women that push out babies, and you got people talking about kidney stone is worse. But I can imagine, some sharp ball of glass ripping its way through you and you can't get to it, So, people want to do invasive maneuvers and cut you open and pull it out. Then you have what do they call it? Ultrasonic technologies to try and hit it with frequencies and break it up, and then eventually, you urinate the big pieces out. But you also have plant technology that will smooth the sharp edges, right? And then also destabilize it so it breaks. So now it's smaller and it's smoother. Smooth it out, break it out, smooth it out, break it out, smooth it out, break it out. And at the end of the day, you're urinating these little pieces of sand with round edges around them. You see what I'm saying? I think that's a much healthier way to go about ridding yourself of kidney stones, you know. And in addition to kidney stones, it assists in the stabilization of blood pressure. It helps to pressurize your nephrons. It heals the tissues of the proximal and distal convoluted tubes. It helps to stabilize the levels of solute versus fluid between the loop of Henle and the cortex area of your kidney. It's one of the best kidney medicines on this planet that I have laying on here right now. And the most magnificent part about this leaf is if I take this leaf right now and I just let it sit on this desk, as you can see, I'm gonna hold this one up right here. You see that one's all ripped. Let me go to this one right here. You see all them little things around the edges, them little white hairs? Those are roots. When have you ever seen roots directly grow out of a leaf before? And everywhere you see the root growing, a plant could grow. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. 28 plants from this one leaf. So each one of these leaves kicking out about 30 plants. So if I got 100 leaves, how many plants can I grow? And how many leaves is on a plant? And then how much juice can I get from that plant to use to power my home, my community, my city, or my world? How many kidneys can I heal? You see what I'm saying? When I'm able to do something as simple as trip, fall, and drop a leaf, and now I got a whole garden that grew all on its own. So I wanted to make sure I put this down here, and it's called love bush. And it's called love bush because there's some folklore attached to this herb, in that if you want to know whether or not somebody loves you or not, you write their name on the leaf or on a note in the leaf and you bury it. If it grows, they love you. If it doesn't, it's time to move on. In addition to that, this love bush contains inside of it a great deal of all of the enzymes from your citric acid cycle. This is the cycle that takes place in your mitochondria, in which you are liberating high energy hydrogens and energy from the food you eat. And this leads into the electron transport chain, where you actually make power and make ATP. This leaf contains all of those enzymes saturated in them. Very high amount of molecular hydrogen exists inside of this leaf. So it serves many purposes, but one of its most powerful purposes, other than powering your city and your community, would be powering your alkaline and acid organ known as the kidneys, replenishing, re-strengthening your renal system. Now, once we get to the collecting duct, we then end up in the calyces and the renal pelvis. From the renal pelvis, the waste, what has not been reabsorbed back in the body, the urea and all of that, the potassium ions, the hydrogen ions, all of those are released in the renal pelvis. They start to descend from the renal pelvis down the ureters, and they start filling the bladder up. And the bladder is like a balloon. It's small in its resting state, but as it gets filled, it swells up. And when it gets to a certain weight, that's when you get a message, a notice inside that says it's time to use the bathroom, and you release said bladder. But this is how your body is able to cleanse or process the blood, as well as balance the acid and alkaline levels inside of the body. And we know Dr. Sebi always talked about alkalinity, and the reason being for that is pH is what governs the voltage or the current that keeps our body alive. The intelligence is everlasting, but the charge is not. See, we have to keep ourselves charged when we're here in order to get the things done we need to. And in order to be charged, we provide ourselves with light, we provide ourselves with water, we provide ourselves with food, and kidneys is what balances the process of oxidation, where you're losing electrons, you're losing power, you're losing energy, versus reduction, where you're gaining electrons, you're getting paid, you're getting money. All right, so once again, we're going from the aorta, right, to the renal artery, the renal artery, the renal artery, the renal arteriole, all right, into the afferent arteriole, into the glomerulus, where it has 3 layers of filtration. What comes out of this into the Bowman's capsule and the convoluted tube leading to your ureters is the filtrate. The remaining blood continues to go to the capillaries and ends up coming out the efferent arterioles, which then leads to the vasa recta. You have the vasa recta here, and you also have the vasa recta here too, right there. It's a network of capillaries similar to the glomerulus, but they are from the efferent arterioles as opposed to the afferent. From there, proximal convoluted tube, loop and Henle, collecting duct, all right? From collecting duct, it ends up going into the calyces, to the renal pelvis, down the ureters, into the bladder, and out. So in that process, we have an exchange, a powerful exchange of energies, positive and negative charges that are created based on the electrolytes that are being exchanged through these tissues, such as potassium, chloride, sodium, water, and so forth. Now, lastly, I want to also recognize the fact that love bush, also known as Bryophyllum pinnatum, is an extremely powerful herb to use in regards to kidney health. I would add to that also horsetail and hydrangea. Hydrangea is extremely important because when you look at hydrangeas, they're pink, they're blue, they're purple, they're white. Why are they all these colors? Hydrangea means water. It's a water plant. And this plant shows you the alkalinity of the soil based on the color the flowers are, because the colors are based on how much aluminum is either absorbed or not absorbed by the plant. And that determines whether it's going to go towards a bluish purplish color or it's going to go towards a reddish pinkish color. So pH determines a great deal in regards to energy dynamics in our body. And Dr. Sebi made sure to state the term alkaline because we are slightly more alkaline than we are acidic. Living in such a world that is saturated in fear, in stress, we are constantly overusing our adrenal cortex, producing adrenaline and epinephrine, which is overusing our sympathetic nervous system, destroying our parasympathetic nervous system. So it only makes sense that we pay more attention on the term alkaline so we can understand how important it is to be focused on receiving more than we're actually giving or being taxed. And with that, I would like to thank all of y'all for taking the time out to journey with me through the kidney.